The secret to a productive Tuesday in the soul-crushing humidity of a mid-Atlantic July isn't a better to-do list, a standing desk, or some life hacker's cold brew coffee recipe. The secret is 16,000 BTUs of window-rattling, Arctic-blasting freedom. It's the constant, reassuring grumble of an appliance that's working its metallic heart out to stave off the certainty that you live in a swamp someone accidentally built a town on. My secret, my salvation, my loyal, grumbling companion against the oppressive summer was a window air conditioning unit I called Old Faithful. Old Faithful wasn't pretty. It was a 10-year-old Kenmore, the color of a computer from the 90s, with a slight, permanent list to the left and a filter that I probably should have changed more often than I did. But it was mine. And from my home office on the second floor, it transformed a room that would otherwise be a sweat lodge into my personal refrigerated sanctuary. As a remote software developer, this room was my entire world from 9 to 5. It was my cockpit, my command center, my fortress of solitude. And Old Faithful was its life support. My fortress, however, happened to be located in Maple Creek Estates, a suburban development so meticulously planned it felt less like a neighborhood and more like a psychological experiment in beige conformity. Maple Creek was a place where the color of your mailbox was subject to committee review. The grass was judged with a level of scrutiny usually reserved for nuclear launch codes, and holiday decorations had to be taken down within a strict 72-hour window post-holiday, lest you be branded a festive anarchist. When you buy a house here, you don't just get a deed. You get a 3-ring binder thick enough to stop a bullet, filled with covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It's the Bible of Bland, the Torah of Taupe. And every religion needs a high priestess. Ours was Carol Peterson. Carol lived 3 houses down, in a colonial that was so perfectly symmetrical it looked like it was rendered by a computer. She was the Homeowners Association president, a title she held with the iron-fisted gravitas of a Roman emperor. I'd had a few run-ins with her. There was the time she left a passive-aggressive note on my door because my recycling bin was, and I quote, visible for an excess of 3 hours post-collection. Another time I saw her through my blinds, using a tape measure to confirm that the small decorative flag I'd put in my garden was, in fact, 2 inches taller than the 12-inch maximum stipulated in Bylaw 14, Section 8A. She didn't say anything to me. She just measured, nodded to herself with grim satisfaction, and walked away. The next day, a formal warning letter appeared. You see, in Maple Creek, there are rules, and then there are rules. One set is in the binder they give you when you sign your soul away at closing. The other set exists only in the mind of Carol Peterson, a woman who probably thinks beige is a dangerously spicy color. I mostly just kept my head down, paid my dues, and thanked God that my office faced the backyard, where her prying eyes couldn't easily reach. My little rebellion was Old Faithful, humming away, a bastion of blissful, cool indifference to the aesthetic tyranny that governed our lives. I was blissfully unaware that my humble AC unit was about to become the casus belli for the dumbest, most expensive war I would ever wage. The first shot was fired on a Wednesday. The heat index had just crested 100 degrees. A thick, wet blanket of misery that made the simple act of walking to the mailbox feel like an Olympic sport. I didn't have to, though, because the enemy delivered the declaration of war directly to my doorstep. Taped to my front door, right at eye level, was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't from the post office. It had the self-important thickness of high-quality cardstock, the kind of paper used for wedding invitations and formal demands for surrender. It was the official communication method of the Maple Creek Estates HOA for matters of grave importance. My stomach tightened. The last time I'd gotten one of these, it was to inform me that my garden hose was not coiled in a visually pleasing concentric pattern. I plucked it from the door and retreated into the cool embrace of my house. Inside, I leaned against the door, held the envelope up to the light, and sighed. It was addressed simply to current resident. So personal. I tore it open, my thumb catching on the needlessly sharp corner. The letter inside was a masterpiece of the form, a Mona Lisa of passive-aggressive pettiness. It didn't accuse, it observed. It didn't demand, it reminded. It was written in a calm, soothing tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Dear resident," it began, "it has come to the Architectural Review Committee's attention that a certain modification has been made to the exterior of the property at 112 Willow Lane. As per the guiding principles of our community, our shared goal is to maintain a consistent and harmonious aesthetic for the benefit of all residents and the preservation of our property values." I snorted. Harmonious aesthetic was Carol speak for anything I personally don't like. Specifically, we are referring to the violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4C, regarding temporary exterior modifications not in keeping with the aesthetic harmony of the community. The apparatus in question is the window-mounted air conditioning unit located on the second-story rear-facing facade of the dwelling. The rear-facing facade. You could only see it if you were standing in my backyard, or, more likely, standing in Carol Peterson's second-floor guest bedroom with a pair of high-powered binoculars. While the committee understands the desire for climate control during the warmer months, the bylaws are clear on this matter. Such devices detract from the uniform appearance we all strive to uphold. We trust you will rectify this matter within 14 days to avoid further action, including potential fines as outlined in the association's charter. Sincerely, Carol Peterson, President, Maple Creek Estates HOA. I read it once. Then I read it again, my brain struggling to process the sheer, unadulterated audacity. My reaction came in stages. First, a wave of disbelief washed over me. This had to be a joke. A window unit? In the back of my house? Then came a short, sharp bark of laughter. The absurdity was just too perfect. Finally, as the laughter subsided, a hot, tingling sensation spread through my chest. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I started pacing the living room, the letter clenched in my fist. "Aesthetic harmony?" I said to my empty house. "It's a white box, Carol. It matches the trim. What do you want? One made of reclaimed barnwood and artisanal hypocrisy? It's 98 degrees out. Are we supposed to cool our homes with positive thoughts and community spirit?" I stalked into the kitchen, snatched my phone off the counter, and immediately dialed my best friend Dave. He was a corporate lawyer, which meant he spent his days swimming in this kind of bureaucratic nonsense, but for a different class of sociopath. He answered on the second ring. "Dave," I said, my voice tight. "They've done it. They've finally done it." "Who's they?" His voice was laced with amusement. "The lizard people? Did they finally reveal themselves from their subterranean lairs?" "Worse, the HOA," I seethed. "They've declared war on Old Faithful." I heard a rustling sound, then a muffled snort as he tried to suppress a laugh. "Your AC unit? What'd it do? Look at Carol's prize-winning petunias the wrong way?" "Aesthetic harmony, Dave," I said, spitting the words out like poison. "That's the charge. My humble, life-sustaining air conditioner is a crime against visual decency." "No!" Dave's laughter was no longer suppressed. It was a full-blown cackle. "You're kidding me. The one in the back of the house?" "The very same," I confirmed. "I have 14 days to rectify the matter or face the wrath of the committee. Fines will be levied. Standards will be upheld. Harmony will be restored." "This is the best thing I've ever heard," Dave managed to say between gasps. "So what are you going to do? You have to fight this. This is the hill to die on, my friend." I looked at the letter, at Carol's prim and proper signature. Dave was right. This wasn't about an appliance anymore. This wasn't about the heat. This was about tyranny. This was about a woman who had a laminated copy of the bylaws in her glove compartment. This was about freedom, and I was about to get very, very creative. Later that night, Dave and I were locked in what we called a council of war, which was really just a video call where he drank expensive whiskey, and I drank cheap beer while we plotted. My initial rage had cooled into a hard, dense nugget of spite. "Okay, Operation Petty Compliance is a go," I said, pulling up a digital whiteboard on my shared screen. "Phase 1, brainstorm." "I'm with you," Dave said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Idea 1, malicious camouflage. You paint a photorealistic mural on the AC unit of the window and siding behind it. From a distance, it'll be invisible. It's the predator of air conditioners." "I like it," I mused. "But she uses binoculars. She'll see the heat haze shimmering off of it. What else you got?" "Okay, how about architectural misdirection? You build a tiny, ornate birdhouse around it. A really beautiful one, with gingerbread trim and multiple levels. When she complains, you claim it's a sanctuary for the endangered beige-breasted titmouse. She can't argue with saving an endangered species." "The beige-breasted titmouse," I repeated, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Dave, you're a genius. A sick, twisted genius." "Or," he continued, leaning into his camera, "you go with the signage defense. You just put a tiny, professionally printed sign on it that says, 'This is not an air conditioner.' What is it? That's for her to figure out. It could be a small-scale atmospheric moisture condenser. An experimental bee calming device. The possibilities are endless. We spent a solid hour riffing on these ideas, each one more gloriously unhinged than the last. But as the initial humor wore off, the grim reality set in. These were funny, but they were temporary solutions. Carol would just find another bylaw to weaponize. She was a heat-seeking missile of misery, and I needed a permanent defense system. "You know," Dave said, his tone turning serious for a moment, "the path of least resistance here is to just take it out. Get one of those portable units on wheels. It's not as good, but it's not a violation." "No," I said, the stubbornness hardening in my gut. "No, Dave, that's letting her win. This isn't about the heat anymore. It's about the principle of the thing. You don't negotiate with terrorists, and you don't bow to HOA presidents who think a window unit is a gateway drug to putting a car up on blocks in the front yard." "So what's the master plan then, General?" he asked. "What are you going to do, install a whole central air system just to spite her?" He meant it as a joke, an exaggeration. But as the words hung in the digital air between us, a light bulb didn't just go on in my head. A supernova erupted. The gears in my brain, usually occupied with debugging code and optimizing databases, whirred to life with a new, magnificent purpose. "Dave," I said slowly, my fingers flying across my keyboard, pulling up the Maple Creek Estate's HOA website. "Stay with me here." I navigated to the Documents section and downloaded the 300-page PDF of the community bylaws. The Holy Scripture itself. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm going to the source," I replied, my eyes scanning the table of contents. "Architectural guidelines, exterior modifications, fences, mailboxes. Here we go. Section 7. Utilities and external apparatus." I shared my screen, and we both stared at the dense block of text. My finger traced the line on my monitor as I read it aloud. Okay, look at this. Section 7, 4C. No window-mounted or through-wall air conditioning units shall be visible from the street, nor shall any such installation permanently alter the structure's primary facade. "Well, there you go," Dave said with a sigh. "You're screwed. It's right there in black and white." A manic grin stretched across my face. "Am I, Dave? Am I really? Read what it doesn't say. Read it carefully. Dave leaned closer to his screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He read the paragraph again, then a third time. It doesn't say you can't build a moat, he said, confused. What's your point? It specifies window-mounted and through wall, I said, my voice electric with discovery. It's all about preserving the look of the walls, the windows, the facade. It says nothing, absolutely nothing, about the roof. A long silence hung between us. Dave just stared at his screen. His whiskey glass was frozen halfway to his lips. Alex, he said, his voice barely a whisper. No. Oh, yes, I replied, already typing commercial HVAC installers near me into a new browser tab. Oh, very much yes. Carol wanted my AC unit off my wall. Fine, I'll take it off my wall, and I'll put it somewhere she never even thought to regulate. My quest began the next morning. Fueled by 3 cups of coffee and a burning sense of righteous indignation, I opened my laptop and started making calls. I was a man on a mission. A very specific, very stupid mission. My Google search history from that day probably put me on some kind of watch list. Largest residential HVAC. Can you put a commercial AC on a house? How much does a strip mall AC unit cost? The first call was to a highly rated local company, Comfort Zone HVAC. A chipper woman named Brenda answered. Thank you for calling Comfort Zone, where your comfort is our business. How can I help you? She chirped. Hi, Brenda, I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. I'm looking for a quote on a rooftop HVAC system for my house. Absolutely, she said. We can certainly help with that. A rooftop package unit is a great space-saving option. What's the square footage of your home? About 2,200, I told her. Okay, so you're probably looking at a 3-ton, maybe a 4-ton unit if you have high ceilings or a lot of sun exposure. I can have a technician out there tomorrow to take a look and… No, I cut her off. I'm thinking bigger, much bigger. There was a pause. Bigger? Brenda asked, her chipper tone faltering slightly. How much bigger? Well, I said, looking at the specs on a website for a unit designed to cool a medium-sized grocery store. What do you have in the 10 to 15-ton range? Something commercial grade. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear her faint breathing, the quiet hum of her office. I imagined her looking around, wondering if one of her co-workers was putting her on. Sir, she finally said, her voice dripping with suspicion. Is this a prank call? Before I could answer, I heard a click. She'd hung up on me. Undeterred, I tried another company, Airmasters. I got a guy named Stan who sounded like he'd rather be doing literally anything else. I gave him the same spiel. Stan was less polite than Brenda. A 15-ton unit? For a house? He grunted. What are you doing in there, kid? Running a server farm for Google? We don't do that. Call an industrial specialist. He hung up before I could get another word in. Call number 3 was even shorter. The guy just laughed for 10 solid seconds and then hung up. I was starting to feel dejected. My grand plan was being thwarted by the very people I needed to enact it. Was my dream of weaponized climate control destined to fail? I slumped in my chair, staring at my search results. My eyes landed on a listing that looked different from the others. It didn't have a slick website with pictures of happy families. It had a simple, block-lettered name and a phone number. Gus's Industrial Cooling and Refrigeration. The refrigeration part gave me hope. These guys probably worked on walk-in freezers. They understood extreme temperatures. I dialed the number. The phone rang 4 times before a voice that sounded like a rock tumbler full of gravel answered. Gus is cooling. What's the emergency? Hi, no emergency, I said quickly. I was hoping to get a quote for a rooftop installation on a residential property. "We don't do houses, kid," the voice rumbled. "The name's industrial cooling, not cozy cottage climate control. You got the wrong number." He was about to hang up. I could feel it. "Wait," I yelled into the phone. "That's the thing. I don't want a residential unit. I want one of yours. One of the big ones. The kind you see on top of a Best Buy." There was a long, weary sigh on the other end. The sound of a man who had seen too much in his life. It was a sigh that contained multitudes. It contained 40 years of leaky Freon lines, burnt-out compressors, and calls at 3 a.m. because the ice cream freezer at a 7-Eleven was on the fritz. "What's the address?" Gus grumbled. "I gotta see this for myself." 2 days later, a vehicle pulled up that could only be described as a landmark. It was a massive, beat-up Ford E350 work van, once white, now a mottled patchwork of rust, primer, and grime. The logo on the side, Gus's Industrial Cooling, was faded and peeling. It parked on the pristine asphalt of my cul-de-sac, like a derelict battleship docking at a yacht club. The side door slid open with a screech of tortured metal, and a man who was built like a vending machine descended. He had to be Gus. He was in his late 60s, with a thick neck, a bristly gray flat top, and forearms like cured hams. He wore grease-stained work pants and a dark blue t-shirt stretched tight over a formidable gut. He slammed the van door shut, the sound echoing through the preternaturally quiet street, and stared at my house. He wasn't just looking at it, he was assessing it, his eyes squinting with a deep professional skepticism. He looked at my neatly edged lawn, my perfectly painted trim, my decorative shutters, and then back at his colossal van, as if trying to solve a complicated math problem. I opened the front door and walked out to meet him. "Gus?" He turned his head slowly, his expression unchanging. "You're the kid from the phone," he stated. It wasn't a question. "The one who wants to put a shopping mall on his roof." "Something like that," I said with a nervous smile. "I'm Alex." We shook hands. His was like shaking a leather-wrapped brick. "All right, Alex," he sighed, pulling a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket. "Let's see the patient. Talk me through this madness." I led him around the back of the house and explained the situation. I told him about the oppressive heat, about Old Faithful, and most importantly, about Carol and the letter. As I spoke, he listened with a deadpan expression, taking slow, deliberate drags from his cigarette. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded occasionally, his eyes scanning every detail of my property. The walls, the windows, the power line coming in from the street, and finally, the roof. When I was done, he flicked his cigarette butt into the grass, an act that would probably get him a formal demerit from the HOA, and looked me square in the eye. "So, let me get this straight. You're willing to spend a fortune, and I mean a fortune, on a commercial-grade cooling system you absolutely do not need, all because your neighbor lady got her panties in a twist over that little pea shooter in your window?" "That's a fair summary, yes," I admitted. He was silent for a moment. Then a low rumble started in his chest. It grew into a wheezing chuckle, then a full-throated hacking laugh. It was the laugh of a man who appreciated pure, high-quality absurdity. "Okay," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "Okay, I like it." He spent the next hour inspecting everything. He climbed a ladder to the roof and stomped around, checking the joists. He squeezed into my sweltering attic, cursing under his breath as he examined the structural supports. He stared at my circuit breaker for a solid 5 minutes, muttering about amps and dedicated lines. Finally, he came back down, covered in sweat and cobwebs. He sat on my back step and started to lay out the reality of my request. "Kid, let me be clear," he began, counting off points on his thick fingers. "This is the single dumbest idea I have ever heard in my 40 years in this business. It's overkill on a level that borders on performance art. First, we need an engineer to sign off on the roof's load-bearing capacity. Might need to reinforce it. Second, the ductwork. We'd have to rip out half your attic to install ducts big enough for the airflow on a 10-ton unit. Third, the power. Your current electrical panel can't handle it. We'd need to run a whole new, heavy-duty line from the street. That's a big job. Fourth, the noise. A unit this size doesn't hum. It roars. It will sound like a 747 is permanently parked on your shingles. Your neighbors will hate you. Not just the crazy lady, all of them. Fifth, your electric bill will look like the national debt of a small country. You'll be paying more to cool your house than you do on your mortgage. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He clearly expected me to back down, to see reason. He was trying to talk me out of it, to save me from myself. I just looked at him, my resolve unshaken. But can you do it? Gus stared at me, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He saw that I wasn't kidding. I was a man possessed by a vision, a very stupid, very expensive vision. I pulled out my phone and showed him the picture I'd taken of the specific HOA bylaw. He took the phone, squinting at the screen. He read the paragraph about window-mounted and through-wall units. He read it again. A slow, conspiratorial grin spread across his face. He finally, truly understood. This wasn't a cooling problem, it was a spite project, and Gus, it turned out, was a connoisseur of spite. "That's a hell of a loophole, kid," he said, handing the phone back. He stood up, his knees cracking like a firecracker. "So you'll do it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Oh, I'll do it," he said, a gleam in his eye. "This is the most interesting job I've been offered in a decade, but the quote is going to make your eyes water, and I want half of it up front, non-refundable." He paused, tapping his temple. "We'll call it the stupid tax." "Send me the paperwork," I said, without a moment's hesitation. The email from Gus arrived 2 days later. The subject line was simply, quote, 112 Willow Lane. I let it sit in my inbox for a full hour, its unread status mocking me, daring me to open it. It felt less like an email and more like a bomb. Finally, I took a deep breath, cracked my knuckles, and clicked. The PDF loaded, and my blood ran cold. The number at the bottom of the page had so many digits it looked like a phone number. It was for a 12.5-ton Tempmaster registered trademark commercial rooftop unit, including structural engineering consultation, roof reinforcement, custom ductwork, a full heavy-duty electrical upgrade, crane rental, and labor. The total was more than my car was worth. It was more than my entire college education had cost. It was a staggering, monumental, terrifying amount of money. This was insane. I was insane. I was about to drain a significant portion of my life's savings to win a fight over a 10-year-old window AC unit. My finger hovered over the delete key. This was my out. I could just pretend it never happened. I could buy a portable unit, write Carol a check for the inevitable fine, and swallow my pride. It was the smart thing to do, the responsible thing to do, and then I saw her. Through my office window, I saw Carol Peterson. She was on the sidewalk, pretending to be weeding the small patch of grass by the curb. But her phone was out. She was holding it up, angling it, trying to be subtle. She was taking pictures of Old Faithful. As I watched, she straightened up and looked directly at my window. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. She gave me a smug, tight-lipped smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of triumph, the smile of someone who knew they had you beaten. And then she gave a tiny, condescending little wave, a flick of the wrist that said checkmate. Something inside me snapped. All reason, all financial prudence, all common sense evaporated in a flash of pure, white-hot rage. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened the digital quote from Gus, scrolled to the bottom, and clicked the big green Approve button. I navigated to my bank's website, entered Gus's company information, and wired the deposit. The massive, non-refundable, stupid tax. The confirmation screen popped up. Your transfer has been scheduled. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, thrilling terror, the kind you feel at the top of a roller coaster right before the big drop. There was no going back. The die was cast. The war machine was in motion. I picked up my phone and sent a screenshot of the approved quote and the wire transfer confirmation to Dave. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Dave. Holy S*******. Dave. You did it. Dave. You absolute lunatic. I typed back, my hand strangely steady. Me. It's not about the money anymore, Dave. It's about sending a message. Dave. The message is that you've lost your damn mind and that you're apparently secretly a billionaire. I'm coming over. I'm bringing beer and a psychological evaluation form. I leaned back in my chair, the terror slowly subsiding, replaced by a giddy, unhinged sense of glee. I looked back out the window. Carol was gone. But it didn't matter. The first battle may have been hers, but the war was about to escalate to a level she couldn't possibly imagine. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparations. My quiet suburban life was suddenly filled with strange men showing up at my door. First came the structural engineer Gus had hired, a quiet, serious man who spent 3 hours in my attic taking measurements and muttering about load distribution. He left me with a blueprint that showed where steel reinforcements would need to be added to the roof joists. It looked like the plans for a bank vault. Then came the electricians. They spent a whole day planning the new heavy-duty line, which would involve digging a trench across my front lawn. My beautifully manicured, HOA-compliant front lawn. I could already feel Carol's spider sense tingling. The most surreal part of the process was my trip to the city permit office. I walked into the cavernous, linoleum-floored hall, clutching a folder full of paperwork from Gus and the engineer. I took a number and waited 45 minutes, listening to the drone of the fluorescent lights. Finally, my number was called, and I approached the counter where a woman named Darlene, who looked profoundly bored with the universe, was stamping papers. "Help you?" she asked without looking up. "Yes, hi. I need to file a permit for an HVAC installation," I said, sliding the folder across the counter. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first page. She stopped. She looked up at me, then back down at the form. "This is a commercial permit application." "That's right," I said. "And the property address, this is in Maple Creek Estates?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "That's a residential zone." "Also correct," I confirmed. Darlene stared at me, her brain trying to resolve the conflict. It was like I'd told her I wanted to install a petting zoo in my living room. "You can't file a commercial permit for a residential property, sir." "Is there a code against it?" I asked politely. She sighed and began typing furiously into her computer. Her eyes scanned the screen for a minute, then 2. Her typing slowed. She clicked her mouse a few times. Finally, she looked up at me, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. "Well, no, there's no code against it. It's just, no one's ever done it before." "There's a first time for everything," I said with my most charming smile. She stared at the paperwork, then at me, then back at the paperwork. With a sigh of utter defeat, she picked up her stamp, slammed it down on the application with unnecessary force, and shoved the folder back at me. "Approved! Next!" The surveyors from Gus's team were the final straw for the neighborhood. 2 guys in bright yellow vests spent an afternoon on my lawn with tripods and measuring equipment. The neighborhood rumor mill went into overdrive. Whispers started. People would stop and stare as they walked their dogs. I saw curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Predictably, it was the surveyors that triggered Carol into action. A few days later, a new letter appeared. This one wasn't a cream-colored note. It was a sharp, white envelope from a downtown law firm. Inside was a formal cease and desist order. It accused me of commencing unapproved structural modifications in direct violation of community bylaws and threatened immediate legal action if all work was not halted. It was based entirely on suspicion and rumor. She was firing blindly, trying to intimidate me. I immediately forwarded it to Dave. An hour later, he emailed me back a draft of a response. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that all planned work was being performed in full compliance with city regulations, as evidenced by the enclosed copy of the city-approved permit. It also noted that a thorough review of the community bylaws revealed no restrictions on the work being performed, and that any attempt to impede the project would be met with a countersuit for harassment. I printed it, signed it, and walked it down the street myself. I didn't put it on her door. I put it right in her mailbox and flipped up the little red flag. It was a declaration that the Cold War was over. The real fireworks were about to begin. Installation day arrived on a Tuesday morning. The air was already thick and humid at 7 a.m., the kind of quiet, peaceful morning Maple Creek prided itself on. And then the ground began to shake. The first vehicle to arrive was a massive flatbed truck, so long it had to make a three-point turn just to navigate our cul-de-sac. Strapped to its back, like a captured beige whale, was my 12.5-ton Tempmaster registered trademark commercial rooftop unit. It was even bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just an air conditioner, it was a monument to spite. It was glorious. Following close behind the flatbed was the crane. It wasn't a small cherry picker. It was a legitimate city skyline building telescoping boom crane that looked like it belonged on a skyscraper construction site. It unfolded in my driveway with a series of hydraulic hisses and groans, its outriggers pressing into the pristine asphalt. Gus's crew, a team of 4 guys who all looked like they could bench press a pickup truck, swarmed out of their van and began setting up, their movements efficient and practiced. The quiet suburban morning was shattered. The neighborhood woke up. One by one, doors opened. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came out in his bathrobe, clutching a mug of coffee, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The family across the street, the Millers, came out onto their porch, their kids pointing with wide eyes. Within 10 minutes, the entire cul-de-sac had become an impromptu audience. People were standing on their lawns, phones out, recording the spectacle. The neighborhood Facebook group, which was usually a forum for complaining about dog poop and announcing bake sales, was undoubtedly exploding. I watched it all unfold from my living room window, sipping my own coffee like a general observing a battle from his command tent. I felt a profound, almost zen-like sense of calm. The absurdity of the situation had become so total, so all-encompassing, that it was almost peaceful. This was really happening. My ridiculous dream was becoming a loud, disruptive reality. Gus, directing the operation like a seasoned maestro, saw me in the window and gave me a curt nod. He yelled to his crew over the roar of the truck engines. "All right, boys, let's put this refrigerator on the roof. Gently now, we don't want to wake the neighbors." He shot a wink towards the growing crowd of bewildered residents. The moment of truth arrived. The crane operator, a guy with a magnificent beard, climbed into his cab. The crane's engine roared to life, a deep diesel rumble that vibrated through my floor. The crew attached 4 thick straps to the corners of the HVAC unit. The slack went out of the lines, and then with a groan of straining metal, the massive beige box began to rise. It lifted off the flatbed, slow and majestic, ascending into the morning sky. It rose above the truck, above the trees, above my garage. For a moment, it blocked out the sun, casting a massive shadow over my house and lawn. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous, and terrifyingly expensive thing I had ever seen. The crane swung the unit over my roof, a multi-ton pendulum of victory, and the crew on the reinforced shingles guided it expertly into place. The crowd of neighbors was silent, their faces a mixture of awe, horror, and grudging respect. They were witnessing the birth of a legend. The legend of the guy who air-conditioned his house with a department store. Just as the unit was being bolted into its final resting place, a new player entered the arena. It was Carol. She wasn't walking. She was power-walking, clad in a head-to-toe Lululemon outfit that probably cost more than my first car. Her face was pinched into a mask of unadulterated rage. She was vibrating with the fury of 1,000 violated bylaws. She marched directly up to Gus, who was busy yelling instructions to his men on the roof. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the mechanical behemoth on my house. "You can't do this. This is a residential community." Gus, who had clearly dealt with his share of angry busybodies, didn't even turn around. He just pointed a greasy thumb over his shoulder towards my front door. "Talk to the homeowner, lady. I just install the hardware." This was not the response Carol was looking for. Her face turned a shade of crimson that clashed violently with her pink athletic top. She whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I am calling the police," she announced to the assembled crowd. "There is an illegal commercial operation happening in our neighborhood. This will not stand." She got on the phone, and we were all treated to her side of a frantic 911 call. "Yes, there's a crane, a massive crane. They're trying to install a factory on my neighbor's roof. Send everyone." 15 minutes later, a squad car rolled slowly down the street and parked behind Gus's van. 2 police officers got out. They did not look like they had been sent to raid a factory. They looked tired. They looked like this was probably the 10th ridiculous HOA dispute they had been called to this month. They ambled over to Carol, who immediately launched into a high-pitched, frantic tirade, gesticulating wildly at my roof. The officers listened patiently, their expressions a perfect blend of professional neutrality and profound boredom. Finally, one of them held up a hand to stop her. "Okay, ma'am. Let's go talk to the homeowner." I saw them coming and met them at my front door, holding a neatly organized folder. The first officer, whose name tag read Miller, sighed. "Sir, we got a call about, he glanced at his notepad. "A factory being installed on your roof?" "Officer," I said calmly, "it's just an air conditioner. A bit on the large side, perhaps, but all perfectly legal." I handed him the folder. Inside was a copy of the city-approved permit, the HOA bylaws with Section 7, 4C highlighted, and the polite but firm letter Dave's firm had sent in response to their cease and desist. Officer Miller took the folder and began to read. His partner, Officer Sanchez, looked over his shoulder. I watched as Miller's eyes went from the permit to the bylaw and then up to the HVAC unit now being wired in on my roof. He looked back down at the bylaw. A small, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips. He was getting it. He closed the folder, handed it back to me, and walked over to Carol, who was waiting with her arms crossed, looking expectant. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice flat. "We've reviewed the situation. He has all the necessary permits from the city, and from what we can see, he isn't actually breaking any of your association's rules." Carol's jaw dropped. But look at it," she sputtered. "It's hideous. It's enormous. It's industrial." Officer Sanchez chimed in, his voice betraying a hint of amusement. "That may be, ma'am, but hideous isn't a criminal offense. And industrial is just a matter of opinion. As far as the law is concerned, he's in the clear. This is a civil matter." "Have a nice day," Officer Miller added, tipping his hat. They got back in their car and drove away. Carol just stood there on the sidewalk, utterly, gloriously defeated. She stared at my roof, her face a thundercloud of impotent fury. The crowd of neighbors slowly began to disperse, shaking their heads and muttering to themselves. The show was over. Checkmate. By late afternoon, the crane and the trucks were gone. The street was quiet again. Gus's crew had finished the last of the wiring and duct connections. He walked me through the system, showing me the new thermostat on the wall. It was a digital command center with more buttons and readouts than the dashboard of a small airplane. "All right, kid," Gus said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's all yours. The fan has a soft start, so you won't get a big power surge. It'll handle humidity, air purity, the works." He pointed to a bright red button under a plastic cover. "Don't touch that. That's the emergency purge cycle. Good if you want to flash freeze a side of beef, bad for your houseplants." He gave me a final, approving nod. "It was a pleasure doing business with you, you magnificent lunatic." With that, he and his crew packed up and left. I was alone in my house. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with possibility. I walked over to the new thermostat, its screen glowing a soft blue. I took a deep breath, and I flipped the switch from off to cool. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum started, so deep it was more of a feeling than a sound. It was followed by a solid, satisfying whoomp from the roof as the 12.5-ton compressor kicked on. My house gave a slight shudder. A moment later, a powerful, silent torrent of cold air began pouring from every vent in the house. It wasn't the gentle, wheezing breeze of Old Faithful. This was a force of nature. This was the breath of a polar god. Within 5 minutes, the humid, sticky air in the house was gone, replaced by a crisp, dry coolness. Within 10 minutes, it was genuinely cold. I had to go upstairs and put on a sweatshirt. By the time I came back down, I could see my breath. A delicate, beautiful layer of frost was beginning to form on the inside of my living room windows. I made myself a steaming mug of hot chocolate. It was 85 degrees and sunny outside, a perfect July evening, and I was treating it like the dead of winter. I wrapped myself in a thick fleece blanket and sat on my couch, the happiest I had ever been in my entire life. I looked out my now frosty window. Across the street, I could just make out Carol's silhouette in her window, staring at my house, staring at my roof. I raised my mug in a silent toast. I was victorious. I was comfortable. I was the king of my own personal Arctic kingdom, sitting upon my icy throne. Just then, I heard the metallic clink of the mail slot on my front door. I got up, my blanket still wrapped around me, and went to see what it was. Lying on the welcome mat was a single, stark white envelope. It was from the electric company. My first bill since the installation. I tore it open. My eyes scanned the page, past the usage charts and meter readings, down to the final bolded number at the bottom. My eyes went wide. My jaw went slack. The amount was catastrophic. It was a number that didn't just suggest bankruptcy, it screamed it from the rooftops. I looked at the bill. I looked out the frosty window at Carol's house. And then a low chuckle started in my chest. It grew into a deep, rolling laugh, the unhinged, joyous cackle of a man who had won the dumbest battle in the most spectacular way possible. The price of freedom was high, but the aesthetic harmony, it was absolutely priceless.